just the QR. So after we do the intro, maybe they can see it.
If we're
Oh,
quiet,
there it is.
yeah, if we're quiet for a second, it comes up. The black line goes away.
Okay, then
Mm-hmm.
we'll just prompt us to stay.
Oh, hold on, I can just move it. Hold on, let me just do this. I'll just move it up. Why go through all that stuff?
Okay, we are
I
on
can just
YouTube now. I'm gonna admit the people on wait list.
let's
And
see here.
ready.
Gracias, Tania.
A ti ya te...
Gracias, Tania.
Y ahorita regreso con ustedes.
I'll just do it.
Perfect.
That's fine. All right, we made it work there.
Oh, there you go. That's
Perfecto.
perfect.
Yeah.
Unless you say like a super long sentence. Hola, buenas tardes a todos.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, hello. Buenas tardes.
Tardes.
Hola, buenas tardes. I took 4 years of Spanish, and I in middle school and high school, and I learned very little, but I learned more in 1 month. I spent a month in Puerto Rico surfing because I was forced to speak the language. And my goodness, man, I mean, because I had to eat and I had to get stuff, so when you're forced to speak it, you learn so much more.
Of
Motivation
course, of
has to do a
course.
lot with it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, welcome, bienvenidos a todos. Creo que estamos muy contentos hoy. Les quiero dar le quiero dar una bienvenida. Es un gran placer y dar la bienvenida a un colega y un amigo muy especial para nosotros, para mí también, el doctor Paul Gavoni. El doctor Gavoni es un científico del comportamiento con más de 20 años de experiencia trabajando en diversos contextos como la educación, los servicios humanos y los deportes del alto rendimiento. A lo largo de su carrera, ha combinado su pasión por lo que es el coaching, el liderazgo organizacional y el rendimiento humano para ayudar a individuos y equipos a alcanzar su máximo potencial, ¿verdad? Ha ocupado diversos cargos, desde director de operaciones hasta coordinador clínico y analista del comportamiento, aplicando siempre los principios del análisis conductual aplicado y la gestión del comportamiento organizacional, lo que es el OBM. Además, es miembro activo de varias organizaciones como la Awareness Foundation y la World Behavior Analysis Day Alliance, y presenta los populares podcasts que son Thoughts and Rants of a Behavior Scientist y Crisis en Educación, Crisis in Education. También es coautor de libros muy aclamados como The Five Scientific Laws of Life and Leadership y Deliberate Coaching. Por si fuera poco, también es conocido como Coach Paul Polly Gloves. Es campeón de los guantes de oro y actual entrenador de MMA, donde él también aplica los principios de la ciencia del comportamiento para entrenar a atletas de talla mundial, incluidos competidores de la UFC. Nos sentimos muy afortunados de tenerlo aquí hoy para compartir sus ideas, herramientas y conocimientos que pueden tal vez inspirar a un cambio real en cualquier función. Bienvenido al doctor Polly. Polly, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise, your energy, and your passion for bringing behavior science to every corner of the world. We're excited that you're here with us. We're truly grateful for your time and for all that you contribute to our community. So welcome to OMPAC.
Well, thank you. And I truly do love disseminating the science of human behavior. And I am very honored to be here. I mean, this just aligns perfectly with my values. I feel like I've been put on this earth to empower people. And I feel like the science of human behavior is the way to do it, right? And I really love helping people to better help themselves and others through behavior science. So it's an honor to be here. And I want to apologize. I wish I wasn't so ignorant that I spoke Spanish. I wish I could give it to you in your native language.
No
Shame on
apologies
me.
necessary.
I know. Thank goodness this is translating for us. But I wish I could, because it sounded wonderful. My bio sounded wonderful in your language. I picked up some words. I was kind of going with it a little bit. Anyways, so all right. Let me just give you a little story, and then I'll just give some folks a little bit about my background, my values, and all that stuff. I was in. I took a long time to get through college. I was very like I did not want to adult. I didn't want to go out in the real world and have to work, and so I was working on the beach. I was renting wave runners, and I was teaching sailboat lessons, and I would show up to work every day in sandals and shorts and half the time not even a shirt, right? It was a nice life to have. Uh, and so, because it just looked like it was a mess out there. And, I'm not getting paid much, but I'm happy, and I was study. But, anyways, all good things have to come to an end. And I started to get bored. It was about time. I think I was like 28 years old. It's about time to go out there and start adulting now, have a real job. And when I got into the workplace, it wasn't what I thought. It was way worse. I did not understand how, and what made it worse were the people that were in leadership positions with authority. I mean, what happened? Was it as soon as you added a title, did they just become like I don't should I want to say a-holes, right? I'm not sure how that's going to transfer in here, and I'll leave it at that, right? I don't know if that translates well enough, but did they become jerks all of a sudden? I just didn't get it. And so after going through many different jobs and experiencing the same thing or something similar, topographically to it, over and over again, I got really tired of it. And I started to complain a lot to my wife. And my wife's actually a school administrator, and I was working the school board because I'm passionate about education. I don't know what's more important than education for reducing poverty and getting people off welfare and reducing incarceration, improving quality of life, and I believe that we, behavior analysts, hold the keys to improving education. But anyway, so I was complaining a lot, and my wife was very supportive. But one day I came home and was complaining for the 500th time, and she looked me very lovingly in the eyes, and she said, and I quote, "Man, stop bitching." So I said, "What do you mean, bitching? I, you know, I, I'm not. And how could you? And all this stuff." And I whined a little bit, and I, pouted for a couple days, and then I thought, you know what? She's right. I either need to accept this, and I could not accept it because I hate to see people talk down to see them coerce, and I knew there was a better way, right? I knew there was a better way. So um, I couldn't accept it, so I either had to change the environment, right? And to do that, I needed to change myself, and that sent me on a journey back to school. And I ended up getting a specialist degree in educational leadership, and then a doctorate in organizational leadership. And what I found was that uh, leadership can be all boiled down to behavior principles. There are a lot of different theories of leadership: servant leadership, which I believe I'm a servant leadership, transformational leadership, authentic leadership, and lots of great theories. And these are all different, like topographies, right, towards a common goal. But the vehicle, right, if you look at those as paths towards this goal, the vehicle for moving towards those goals is the science of human behavior, because all results require behavior, right? And so if we unlock behavior, we can unleash people's potential. And so this took me on a journey of like really looking at leadership through this behavior analytic lens. And I went on to have different leadership positions. I became an assistant principal just so I could prove that I could do things at that level. Then I became a vice president, a COO in multiple places, helping turn around family schools, family organizations, and it wasn't me, it was the science. And the things I did were very practical. And I want to mention that because if I can do it, you can do it too, right? If you're a behavior analyst, if you understand behavior principles, it all came down to doing that, right? I believe that, and actually should have this quote in here, but I don't. But I believe that we can solve 80% of the world's problems with 20% of the science. And I believe it because that's what I've done. There are many behavior analysts that can run circles around me in terms of their knowledge, their conceptual knowledge of behavior analysis. I mean, Jan and I just interviewed one of them the other day, my good friend David Roth, and he's a genius with the science. And so you don't have to be at that level to make a positive difference, but you do need to understand the basic principles of behavior, be a good observer of your behavior and the impact of it on the environment, and be a good observer of the impact of the environment on your behavior, because we got to make sure that we are staying aligned with our values. And if you value the science of human behavior, if you believe in it like I do, then you got to make sure that you're constantly looking through things through that lens, because again, all results require behavior, and there's a science behind it. By the way, I have this QR code up here. This QR code links you to the book Positional Authority Ain't Leadership. That's why I ended up writing the book, and I got with Janet, and Janet translated the whole thing. And I'm very excited to bring that to the Spanish speaking community. I write lots. I don't push books on here to make money. I have hundreds of articles. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, and there'll be a link at the end where you can connect with me on my social media, you can just look at all that stuff for free. And I have podcasts. I'm always constantly talking about stuff. I'm maybe the most prolific, disseminator of the science of human behavior, at least, in our current generation. All right, let me move on. Now, a little bit about me. I mentioned my mission already is to empower people to better help themselves and others through behavior science. I believe that if we unlock behavior, we can unleash people's potential. And I truly believe that. While the science doesn't have all the answers, it can help us to find the best one. And I really, truly believe that. I believe in the science so much. I believe that there's a lot of very well-intended people out in the world and a lot of very well-intended behavior analysts. But in the end, it's not about our intention, is it? It's about our impact. And that's what separates our field from others, is that we should be measuring impact. So, it's really important to have measurements for our impact and not just behavior change. I also want to know how people are feeling about the support that I'm providing them, right? So we need to have some sort of social validity, because it's not just about producing results, is it? It's about how we produce those results, because there are lots of ways to produce results and they're not all ethical. They're not all grounded in positive reinforcement and aligned with our values, at least not my personal values. I don't care about somebody's power. I don't care about how much money they have. I don't care about the cars they drive. I don't care about the initials around their name, the number of articles they've written, the number of books they've written, right? Now, I might respect that stuff, but in the end, it's not about somebody's power. I don't judge them by that. What I am going to judge them by is how they treat the people with the least amount of power. That is what is really important to me. I cannot stand to see people spoken down to. I cannot stand to see people who do not have voice and choice. It's really important to me that we treat people the same. I don't care if it's the maintenance guy or the CEO. I am going to treat people with equal respect. In fact, probably the maintenance guy, I'm going to show them a little bit more respect, because I know they're out there grinding. They're doing a lot every day. They're working hard. Again, I'm not saying I don't respect the CEO, but I really respect the people who are on the front line. So it's important to me to see everybody treated with equal respect. Let me see here. I believe in KISS, keep it simple, scientists, right? I believe that we got to rely on parsimony. When you start making things complicated, you start putting all sorts of confounding things in there. You confuse people that we're trying to support. We confuse ourselves. Keep it simple. Start with the simplest solution. Use just the basic principles of the science to begin with, right? You don't have to make things sophisticated. And I believe in emotions, right? How can you believe in emotions? You're a behavior analyst. No, I'm a radical behavior analyst, and radical behaviorism does not discount emotions. They're just covert behaviors. They're private events. And I believe that we need to be aware of our private events, our covert behaviors. I believe that we need to be aware of these behavioral events. There's an antecedent in the environment, and it evokes this emotion and these thoughts, right? And these can become precursors or antecedents to how we behave. And we need to be aware of the alignment between how we're thinking and feeling and the behavior that we engage in. And are those behaviors aligned with our values? And I'm going to walk you guys through something that I call the behavior alignment compass. It's kind of like an evolution of emotional intelligence and a build off of some ACT. If we have any ACT people out here, I'd love the ACT matrix, but it had a hole in it. And I filled that hole with my behavior alignment compass. But the ACT matrix is wonderful. I wrote an article with Dr. Kevin Polk, who's a wonderful, sweet man. And I used to teach the ACT matrix all the time because it's very simple. And that aligns with one of my core values, again, of keeping things simple. All right. So let's get into the meat of this talk. Now, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to look at systems through a behavior lens. Very practical. Everything I'm going to talk about is very practical. Again, that aligns my values. We're going to look at leadership through a behavior lens. And then we're going to look at finally adaptive intelligence through a behavior lens. And adaptive intelligence is something new that I've coined in my book. Remember our my book, Adaptive Intelligence. Remember, our field came out of evolutionary science, right? And the science is about adapting, right? We evolved because of adaptation, and the environment selects the species based on the traits, right? The behaviors that allowed it to survive. And that's what happens with our own behavior. The environment selects our behavior. But the difference between species adaptation and the behaviors that we can adapt is that we can control the environment of others, potentially if we're in a leadership position, or we can at least begin to adapt our behavior. And our behavior is part of the environment of others, right? People don't think about those things. And if we're in a leadership position of any kind, it's probably a really important variable in the environment of others. So we have to be aware of what we're doing, how we're thinking, all that stuff, and how we're impacting others. All right. So how did I come across leadership? And because I look at leadership through an organizational behavior management lens, I believe that organizational behavior management is the greatest toolbox in the world for leaders, and they should all understand how to leverage this box. And I believe that we can all be leaders, because leadership, as you're going to learn, is not about position. But I'm not going to make this story long because we only have an hour on here. But know that I came into a school that they were getting kids called out of classroom 50 times a day. They had 792 suspensions by the end of the year. They went from an A school to an F school, and the deputy superintendent asked if I can come out here and help turn things around. And I thought to myself, no, what am I going to do with this? It's a mess, because kids were fighting, staff were quitting left and right. But while I don't always believe in myself, as I said earlier, I do strongly believe in science. And that next year, we went from 792 suspensions to 67. We went from kids being called out 50 times a day to 3 in a week. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but it was shaped, and it was all grounded in the practical application of the science of human behavior. And I've written about it in all my books. I've written about it in all my articles. If you're curious to how that happened, just check out any of that stuff. I'm very transparent of what I've done. But I've also used the science of human behavior to train fighters. I have local, state, national, and world champion fighters. Now, you can't see because the translation's coming over. That says only the strong survive. As I talked about earlier about evolution, and people think evolution's about the strong surviving. It's not the strong surviving. It's those who adapt. In my first day into a boxing gym, I was thrown in there with a professional fighter, and he beat the snot out of me. He broke my nose, and it wasn't a good day for me. And I kept coming because I was bullied a little bit when I was a kid, and I just needed this thing for me. Was going through some challenges in my current life. It was important to me to become a fighter, really just so I didn't have to fight anymore, so I didn't have to be afraid, live in fear. I was living in a rough neighborhood. It was just a rough time in my life. But later on, I thought, how many potential world champions came into the gym, took a beating the same way that I did, and left, never came back, thinking they didn't have what it took to be successful. And I see this happening in organizations all the time. I see it happening in schools. I'm not sure how it's going on in Mexico, but in the United States, we have up to 50% of our educators leaving the field inside of 5 years. Not okay. We have up to 50% of our principals only staying in one school for 3 years, and 50% of our superintendents from the largest 500 districts in the nation are leaving inside of 3 years. So it's a revolving door. because we're dropping people into positions unprepared to meet the demands. We, as behavior analysts, have the ability to help people meet those demands. We can help them to become better, right? But one of the issues that a lot of people suffer from is what I call behavioral myopia. They tend to be poor observers of their behavior, poor observers of the impact of their behavior on the environment, and poor observers of the impact of the environment on their behavior. As I stated at the beginning, wow, this is so important. Now, this is particularly important when it comes to behavior analysts, and because we suffer from behavioral myopia as well. What does that mean? And how do you know that you're suffering from behavioral myopia? Well, we tend to look at and apply the science when it comes to working with, let's say, a learner with disabilities, right? Um, but as soon as we take that lens off of the learner and look at, say, the adults in the classroom and other people or our colleagues or somebody else, that adult's performance, we start using words like, well, they're just lazy, they should be doing better, they're this, that, and the other, and we all sorts of adjectives. It turns us into a mentalist instead of a behaviorist. So if you're thinking that way, don't feel bad. I've done the same thing. But remember, if somebody's not performing to a standard, we have to look at the function of the behavior. Why? And in OBM, we use something called the performance diagnostic checklist. I'm actually going to give you an email where you can send for a free performance diagnostic checklist towards the end. But we have to assess why. And it comes down to two things. It's a can't do or don't do. It's a skill deficit or a performance deficit. And this is how we need to intervene, because if somebody can't do it, we can call them all the names of the book. They don't have the skills. So we have to make sure we train them well, right? If it's a don't do, now we have some sort of motivational issue. And that doesn't mean it lies within them. It means it lies within the environment, right? And how can we engage in behavior that's going to increase the likelihood that they want to move towards something, right? And this means that we have to make sure that there's reinforcement, right? And we'll talk a little bit about reinforcement, what it is, because even in our field, like, well, how do we reinforce adults? People are thinking about giving people gas cards, and coffee cards, or whatever it's tokens, and employee of the month. None of that stuff is going to sustain behavior. It might be a token of your appreciation, but I'm going to talk about what the most important reinforcement is, right? And so there's two aspects that are going to get the best out of people in an organization. At the beginning, I talked about the systems and leadership. So we're going to start with systems. And just so if you're a behavior analyst, I'm assuming everybody in here is, or they're interested in the science. Systems are made up of processes. Processes are made up of tasks, and tasks are made up of behavior. What's it tell us? It's in our realm, right? It's in our realm. We're just talking about collective behavior. If you're in an organization or a team, it still comes down to behavior, right? So we need to put a behavior lens on it. So I want you to think about the importance of a system. If you drive anywhere, there's a system in place getting you from point A to B, right? But now imagine, and getting you there safely. But imagine you're driving around and there's car accidents everywhere, right? You're in a new area and cops are pulling people over, or they're responding to accidents and they're giving people tickets. They're sending them back to driving schools. Some, they're suspending their license, and even a few, they're sending to jail because they've gotten in so many accidents, right? And they're never following the speed limit. But then you zoom out and you see, well, hold on. There's no lines in the road. There's no signs to tell you what to do. In fact, there's no rules that govern your behavior, because good systems deliver positive reinforcement for value-added behavior, right? They tell you what to do, where to go. Nobody's coming out to tell you that, right? They just bring your behavior under stimulus control. The same way when you drive somewhere, nobody's coming out to tell you what to do. You are there's constant stream of positive reinforcement coming in that's getting you to your destination. Of course, there's negative reinforcement acting on your behavior as well. But there's a terminal reinforcement. There's an ultimate cause of your behavior that is getting to your destination. And there's constant stream of data coming in through trees going by and the lines in the road and all these familiar things that give you data to let you know you're moving in the right direction. Does that make sense to everybody? Type in the chat just to make sure that everybody's still with me, and that I'm not also talking too fast, because I know it's translating. Am I doing okay with my speech pattern, or should I slow down? I didn't even think about that with the translation.
You're
Okay.
doing wonderful, Holly.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. I got to check in with my stakeholders, right? I want to practice what I preach. All right. So we got to have a good system in place that's deliberately developed to add positive reinforcement for value added behavior. So what might that look like? Well, I'm going to show you a system in education. I'm choosing education because I don't know who's here. It's easy for me to talk about. And education is still an organization. The whole, if it's a district, it's an organization. We can bring it down to school. In fact, we can even go into that classroom. That classroom is very much an organization where that teacher is very much like the CEO, and you have a bunch of little employees running around. Those are the students, right? Trying to produce the most important business results that we know, and that is learning, right? So we can look at OBM, we can zoom in and we can zoom out, right? So here is a system. So here's a system that we can take a look at. Now, when we design a system, we need to design it with the end in mind. If anybody here is an educator or has done anything with instructional design, you always start with the end in mind. What is the outcome that you want to produce? And as we know, all outcomes, all results require behavior. So if we want that outcome, now we have to come back and we have to say, okay, what's the frontline person need to do? In this case, the frontline employee, right, is the learner. So let's say we wanted to reduce suspensions. If you remember that I talked about reducing suspensions, we went from 67 or 7,992 suspensions, out of school suspensions in the school that I was at, down to 67. Let's say we wanted to reduce suspensions. So if we want to reduce suspensions, what would we need our learners to do, right? I'm gonna pose this question to the folks in here. If we want to reduce suspensions, what would we need our learners to do? And if you guys can type that in the chat, if you want to type in your native language, no problem at all. If you know English, that's wonderful. But I'm assuming, Janet, you can translate for me if I see something. So the question is, if we want to reduce suspensions in the school, what behaviors would we need learners to engage in? Go ahead and type in. You can't be wrong because there's lots of them. Just go ahead and type in the chat. Okay, they got to be there, right, Maria? Increase attendance. Good. Show up. What else? Okay, Maria, engage with social peers. I appreciate you putting that in there. Here we go. Positive participation in school activities. Yeah. Okay, good. That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to put all that stuff in a bucket, right? And I'm just going to say, if we want to produce suspensions, we need learners to follow expectations. Would you guys agree with that? Type a yes in the chat if you agree with that. If they follow expectations that are established within the school, then we're very likely to have a drastic reduction in suspension. Yeah, very simple, right? Expectations being a bucket of behaviors. All right. So now we need to zoom up. So if we want to reduce suspensions, we need learners to follow expectations. If we want learners to follow expectations, what do we need the teacher to do? That's the classroom leader, right? So type maybe one thing in the chat. Like if we want students to follow expectations, what would we need the teacher, the classroom leader to do? Yeah, okay, good. Provide structured routines. Absolutely. Keep students motivated. Absolutely. Yes. Good. So I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to say that we need them to first identify their expectations, teach their expectations, which means instruct, model, allow the students to practice, give them feedback on it, right? They should have a plan of how am I going to reinforce the behavior? How am I going to correct the behavior, right? They should engage their stakeholders in developing that plan, right? Hey, what do you like? Preference assessment, right? What should happen if you don't follow directions, right? And that way they know the why and give them, so there's a menu of this stuff and it's very predictable. The same way when you drive, you know that if you speed, you could get pulled over, right? And you can get in a car accident, all these things, and you accept the potential of that happening because there's so much reinforcement built into the activity of driving. So you accept that there are some correction, there are some punishers along the way, and you understand the why of it. And so we need to engage our stakeholders with that. And that means in the classroom, they need to know what's going to happen if they do the right thing and what's going to happen if they do the wrong thing. And it needs to be tied into their values. You'll see there's values here, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we get towards the end, right? But it's going to come back to people knowing why they should be doing it because it ties into something that's important to them. All right. So how am I doing? Am I making sense so far? Right. So this is like, behavior chaining. Think about this as performance chaining. right? You're chaining all this performance, right? And performance is just behavior and result together to get this end outcome. So now, if we want the learner to follow expectations and we want the teachers to teach and reinforce expectation, do all those other things I mentioned, what do we need the school leader to do? And I'm just going to say, we also need them to engage their stakeholders, to determine expectations. If the classroom leader doesn't have the skills, we got to make sure that they provide them the skills to have it, right? So there's a want for them to say, hey guys, what do you think about if we're struggling with behavior challenges? What if we really focus on classroom management because it's going to help the students follow expectations more? It's going to help students to learn better. And would that make your job easier? And like, oh yes, okay. Would it be okay if I brought in and got you some classroom management training? Oh, please do, because we haven't had it. Wonderful. I'm going to do that, So they provide the resources, they provide the training, calendar events, et cetera, et cetera. And then they go out, because what we know very clearly is that training is an antecedent strategy and it doesn't stick without coaching, right? So we got to make sure we go out and we follow up with them. They're giving them feedback and they're helping them to behave well enough and long enough that they produce a valued outcome. Does that make sense, everybody? And then, of course, they maintain those behaviors over time through their own system. And I can go up the chain. Oops, I don't know why this does that. PowerPoint gets very sensitive on here. Yep, there we go. So we go up the chain and say, well, what's the district leader need to do to support the school leader and the state leader? And you'll see in here that there needs to be built-in feedback loops, reinforcing feedback loops up the chain. And the feedback loop needs to be bi-directional, meaning if a classroom leader is supporting the student, right? They're giving the feedback. The classroom leader should be saying, hey, how am I doing for you? The same way I checked with you guys just a little bit and say, hey, how am I doing for you? That's giving feedback, because in the end, it's not about our intention, it's about our impact. And the school leader is giving feedback to the classroom leader to support them, help them move in the right direction, but they're also recruiting feedback from them, soliciting feedback, saying, hey, how am I doing for you as a leader? Is there something I can do more or less or differently? And this shows respect, right? If you value respect, this is giving people voice and choice. And this is ultimately a very powerful reinforcer for people, is giving them voice and choice, because we know that, right? We know that all behavior occurs because of reinforcement. And we know there are two types of reinforcement. There's negative reinforcement. If we use negative reinforcement, people will do just enough to get by and only when you're looking. But if we use positive reinforcement and we shape behavior, here's what will happen. This is us saying, you're doing a good job. You're doing a great job. Try this a little bit more. And of course, we're being behaviorally specific. We might give a token, right? And then all of a sudden, the performer sees this. That's a naturally occurring reinforcer. They see, if it's a classroom, oh, look, the students are behaving a little bit better. They're raising their hands more. They did a little bit better on their assessment this time, And if those are our values, right? Because values are made up of behaviors, and the students of our behaviors, right? But if the students are in the students' behaviors, if they are engaging these behaviors, and that's important to the teachers, we can theorize that that's going to be a reinforcer for them. And if it keeps their behavior going, it is a reinforcer. And if a teacher sees that things are getting better for them as a result of their behavior, there's a really strong chance that that is going to serve as a reinforcer for them. Wouldn't you guys agree with that? We got to keep the students behaving well, and I believe that's a powerful reinforcer for teachers, but also learning more and feeling good, having a sense of community. So we shape, and what will happen is those red ones, those are the naturally occurring reinforcers, right? Our goal is to help people behave well enough and long enough that they produce the naturally occurring reinforcers in the environment. And how do we know what those are? Well, that's why we tap in and find out what their values are. We need to know what's important to people, because those are like a preference assessment, and they let us know what's going to be important for them. And we let them know, hey, by doing these things, this is what's going to help you move towards your values. Does that make sense, everybody? Values are a very important thing. Now in our field, they're augmentals, they're MOs, they generate rules for us. Remember, this is the 4-term contingency. It's not just the 3-term. There's a 4th term there, and that is that MO. We got to create a want for people. I think creating a want is really important, and it's really fundamental to leadership, which you're going to see very shortly. Now, what happens when we systematically positively reinforce Student behavior, right? Well, we get increased retention, meaning they come to school more, but also they learn more, right? Decrease absenteeism, increase morale, increase learning goal achievement, increase pro-social behavior, and all this good stuff happens, right? We get a better culture, whether it be in the classroom or the school. Now, what do you think happens when we systematically use positive reinforcement with the adults in the school or any organization? What do you think happens when we do that? Type in the chat. And by the way, there's a big hint. Okay, yes, that would be ultimately where we want them to use ABA strategy. That would be wonderful if we can get them to adopt. That's the ultimate dissemination. Absolutely. But take a look at what's up there, right? Do we think that by using positive reinforcement with the adults that we're going to get increased retention, decrease absenteeism, increase morale, all those things, achieving their own performance goals? And the answer is 100% yes. It's the same thing, right? We need to use the very thing that we're saying we need to do with learners, we need to do with the adults, because everything comes back to behavior. From an organizational behavior management standpoint, learner behavior, whether it's a school, in a clinic, anywhere else, is a result, right? And it's a result of the environment that we create, and we are a very important part of the environments of others, meaning the teacher's behavior in that classroom and our behavior that's influencing the teacher behavior. Because unless you're working one-on-one with a learner, you're going to need to get the adults that's in that environment, that's going to be in that environment, to do something more or less or differently. They're going to need to change their behavior to create sustainability. It doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong per se, but it's just not right for the behavior for that learner. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So from this zoomed out perspective, learner behavior is a result. And what are we going to do to improve that result, right? And help them produce socially valid outcomes. So we got to think about the adults. You can't make it about the students or the learners without making it about the adults, whether it's the teacher, the behavior analyst, the parents, all these, they need to be engaged with stakeholders. Now, oops, I hate this one that keeps doing that. Now, this is a thing I made up here. Quote: "A great leader without a solid system is like a skilled fighter with no game plan." Right, but conversely, a robust system, right, grounded in behavior principles, like I just rolled out there, without a dynamic leader, is like having the perfect plan but no champion to execute it. You need systems and leadership. You need systems that are deliberately built to deliver positive reinforcement for value out of behavior. As I said, I don't mean giving the tokens and all that stuff. That's great. The ultimate goal is to use that stuff to help people behave well enough and long enough that they produce valued outcomes, right? And one of the things that we can do is give people voice and choice. Those are powerful reinforcers to people. Listen to people, find out what's important to them, give them choice in things, right? Huge reinforcers. Help them to behave well enough and long enough that's going to move them towards their goals. We need good systems that do that, and we need good leadership to do that. Leadership at every level. Now, including, right, it could be organizational leadership, department leadership, team leadership, but also our own leadership, our own behavior, because we can all engage in leadership behaviors, which I'm about to show you right now. What is leadership? Well, here's what it ain't. It ain't about title. In a school, it could be all these titles. If you're in a behavior analytic organization, it could be the CEO, it could be the VP, it could be the manager, it could be the director, it could be the lead behavior analyst. But have you ever, type a yes in here, if you've ever worked with somebody that's had positional authority, but they weren't really a leader, right? Type if you've ever had somebody that was just wielding coercion a lot. I call those people that are have positions of authority like that, I call them dictators. So you want to be aware of that, right? You don't want these people. There's people, like they call them world leaders, and these guys are dictators. They're not okay. I believe leadership is, first of all, fundamentally, I'm glad everybody got that, fundamentally grounded in positive reinforcement. I have a video on that called "Don't Be a Dictator." All right, so here is what leadership is. Leadership is about linking key behavior with valued results, right? Valued meaning valued to the person, right? And it's made up of 4 functional response classes. I call them the 4 hats of leadership. It's heuristic. It's easy to remember, right? Anybody can remember these 4 hats, and you need to know what hat to put on at the right time. And it starts with the leading hat. The leading hat is an MO. Remember, I went back earlier and said we have to inspire people. We got to give people voice and choice, and we need to know their values. They need to know what's in it for them if they're going to move in a direction, right, towards something, because there's got to be a reinforcer for them. And a motivating operation has a value and behavior altering effect. It's about inspiring people to want to go in a direction, right? And so we have to have the leading hat on. But what we know is that simply inspiring people isn't enough. They also need to have the knowledge and skills to move in that direction, right? So whether you're the CEO and making sure that you're inspiring the people directly beyond you, or you're inspiring your whole organization, et cetera, we have to do that. Or you might be a teacher or a behavior analyst working with your RBT, or the RBT working with the learner, right? Don't we need to make sure, doesn't the learner need to know what's in it for them? Isn't that why we do preference assessments, right? Shouldn't they be engaged in the intervention? And the answer is absolutely yes. So we got to put on our leading hat on. And there's different strategies for doing this stuff. I've written a whole course on it with my partners called motivational interviewing, right? To tap into people, to find out what their values are, right? To have them want to engage in behavior change because they know it's going to help them produce valued outcomes. And right now, the things that they're doing aren't producing that. So we got to put on the leading hat. But the leading hat in itself won't work if they don't have the knowledge and skill. So now we got to put on the training hat, right? And the training hat is about skill acquisition. And I don't mean sit and get, I mean building fluency in key skills, instruction, modeling, rehearsal, feedback, right? In having precise so people can do things automatically without thinking. But now here's what we also know, as I said at the beginning, training is an antecedent strategy, right? It might get behavior going, and same thing with the leading hat, it might get behavior going, but it's not going to keep it going. This is where coaching hat comes in. That's the third hat. Where and training is about skill acquisition. Coaching is about the generalization of learned skills in the natural environment. Training is about telling or instructing. Coaching is about asking. It's helping people to become better observers of their behavior and better observers of the impact of their behavior on the environment toward valued goals, right? Coming back to the leading and the leading hat on, that is determining people's values, and they know what's in it for them, to give them the skills. Now they got to see that they're moving in that direction, right? Producing those outcomes, accomplishments, making sure that they see they're moving in a direction towards this terminal outcome. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Type a yes in here if that makes sense, and type a no if you're confused about any of the 3 hats. What time do I have till 8 until 7:50? Do I have until 8, Janet?
So we have an hour. So,
Okay,
but
good.
it's your time. Yeah.
Yes,
So
good. All right. All right. Now, the final hat, and I'm proud about this one. The reason I call these leading and managing and training and coaching, because there's a lot of overlap when you look at them topographically. And this is why I ground them all in function. If you ask people what's the difference between training and coaching, they're like, well, they'll start to give things and they both give feedback. They're both, you're trying to get some sort of goal, right? But one is about skill acquisition, the other one is about generalizing the skills. If they don't have the skill, put on the training hat. If they have the skill, help them behave well enough and long enough in the natural environment, because you're trying to get them to produce that valued outcome, because you ultimately want that outcome to take over as a naturally occurring reinforcer for them, right? Makes simple sense. Now, there's also a lot of confusion about leadership and management, right? And if you notice, these are all verbs because they're about behavior. Leading is about inspiring people. It's MO. Managing is about maintenance of the behavior, right? So we help people to produce these outcomes with the coaching hat on, but now we have to make sure we maintain those behaviors. How do we maintain those behaviors? We maintain them with good systems. I showed you the system before, right? And the systems has contingencies in place. The same way when you drive, there's lots of things that are maintaining your behavior, and it's grounded in positive reinforcement. And you also will accept that if you don't do the right thing, you're going to get some feedback, things are going to happen to correct you, right? But we got to make sure that it is grounded in reinforcement. We want 4-to-1, 6-to-1, 8-to-1, 10-to-1, right? So that way, when you do experience some sort of correction, it's okay, because there's lots of valued outcomes come along the way. So this is why managing is about maintenance of the behavior, right? We got to maintain it. So they're both needed, and anybody can engage in all of these hats, including self-leadership. The leading hat for yourself is having a vision, right? Where do I want to be one day? That's the vision that starts to drive you. I want to do this thing. I wanted to write a book, I wanted to be a disseminator of the science. And what do I need to do to get there? Well, and I need to equip myself with the knowledge and skills, so I went to school to do it. And then I need some coaching from people, whether they directly coach them or I reach out to them to get support, or I tried to recruit feedback from my own behavior, right? I asked myself questions, and I said, well, here's what's supposed to happen. I'm looking at other people. Is this happening, right? And then I had to have a system for managing my own behavior, right? Self-management. I had to have a schedule and I had to produce things daily, weekly, monthly to keep me on track so we can certainly engage in self-leadership. But from this perspective, anybody can be a leader, right? The thing is, the higher up the org chart you go, the more people you can potentially influence, right? And if you're doing it right, the more people you can have a positive influence on. If you're doing it wrong, well, the more people you can hurt. And I don't like that. Now, people think the measure of a leader can be found in the results, but there are lots of different ways to produce results, as I said at the very beginning, and those include coercive ways. We actually had a number of districts, and one particular in Georgia, because I was just there, which they were producing amazing student achievement. They were like, my goodness, what is going on there? This is wonderful. All the students are learning so much. And they lifted up the hood, and it turned out they were giving students the answers to the test. So it's not about results, it's about behavior. If you get the right behaviors going in the right way, you're going to produce the right results. Ultimately, that's the measure of leadership, right? And good leadership is going to use positive reinforcement. You're going to get lots of retention, lots of performance. People are going to be happy and they're going to stay. Um, as I mentioned earlier, there's a key characteristic of good leadership is engaging in MOs, right? So having a value and behavior altering effect. You want to make sure that we're fostering what Albert Daniels calls discretionary effort. In other words, people will want to go above and beyond even when you're not looking because it's producing valued outcomes for them, right? And good leaders lavish positive reinforcement, right? So these are 4 characteristics of good leadership, and that's covered at the bottom there. I see from my from the translation here, but that's what it says there. 4 characteristics of good leadership. Now, what about bad leadership? And there's lots of bad leaders out there, unfortunately. Well, bad leadership, check this stuff out from the Harvard Business Review. It can have a ton of bad outcomes. 37% higher absenteeism, 49% more accidents, 50% more healthcare costs, etc., etc. Bad stuff. People are getting sick, sad, they're not performing well. When you feel afraid, right, of leader, the people that are supporting you or that are managing your performance, you will do just enough to get by and only when they're looking, but it also creates this tunnel vision. You ever been really afraid of something? Like my wife has a massive fear of reptile snakes. And if she sees one, she will run. She'll get tunnel vision and she won't see anything else. She would run into a wall if it was there because she's so afraid. When you feel afraid of the person who's above you, supporting you, them, right? It creates this tunnel vision. All you want to do is do things and not get into trouble. And what that'll do is like performance in other areas will come down, innovation will come down, morale will come down. If we can measure all these things, if we can measure long-term sustainability and retention, all that's going to come down. But people do it because we know that negative reinforcement will produce outcomes. It will produce behavior because people are going to do this thing to avoid trouble. But once again, they're going to do just enough to get by and only when you're looking. Does everybody understand that? Does that make sense? That's a really important concept, right? We don't want to use coercion. We don't want to use fear of consequence to do something. If we do make somebody do something, we better make damn well sure that we're getting them in touch with positive reinforcement as quickly as possible. We better make damn well sure that we've established ourselves as a positive reinforcer, right? If you've done that, people will trust you. When they trust you and you have a good relationship because you've been a purveyor of positive reinforcer, you can give them corrections. You can ask them things to do things. You can say, like, I'm a little bit disappointed that you didn't do this. And it's going to be okay with them because you've developed this trust with them. You've invested it in the relationship bank. If every time you have to correct behavior, it's like making a withdrawal out of the bank. And when you correct more or you withdraw more than you put in, you get overdraft fees. And what that happens is that impacts performance, right? That impacts morale and all these things when you use coercion instead of the use of positive reinforcement for value added behavior. Now, What are the characteristics of bad leadership? Well, I nailed them down to just a few characteristics. I believe that they're coercive, they lack objectivity, they're wearisome, they tire the crap out of me, and they just lack skills in general, right? So those are four characteristics. But oddly enough, if you take a look at this, it makes this neat little acronym. Can you guys see what that acronym says there? If you look at what's in the yellow there, clowns. I call them clowns. Now, like any good behavior analyst, if we're going to have some sort of clowns and we're going to measure leadership, we have to have a scale. And so I created a scale, and it goes from small clowns to what I call ass clowns, right? And so everybody is somewhere on the scale. Now, here's the thing, right? We've all engaged in what I call ass clownery, right? Doing things that maybe we shouldn't do. But the more you engage in that kind of behavior, the more frequently you're doing it with the more people, the more you're moving up a scale. We've all engaged in some sort of class clownery or ass clownery. We could have been small clowns, right? But it's the frequency with which you do it that's going to move you up that scale. But the good news is, as you'll see at the end, that's just about behavior. I don't think there's bad people out there, but there is bad behavior. And we know that we can change behavior, right? That's what the good thing is. Now, here are some things that are part of the scale. We got to have some sort of behavior anchored rated scale. We have all this stuff like they only focus on results. They tell too much. They ask too little. Guys, we have to ask people, right? We have to empower people. We have to create more leaders around them. We have to give them voice and choice. We have to help people become better observers of the behavior and the impact of it. We have to help them better assess, problem solve, make decisions, and take actions. If we don't do that, if we're always telling, they'll become prompt dependent. The same way that every one of you are probably prompt dependent, going to the same place all the time because you use your GPS, because you haven't had to think for yourself. I was doing it for years, going to the airport. 100 times at the airport, I'm still having to use my GPS. I'm going there because I haven't had to think for myself. I stopped doing it, and now I don't have to, or stop using the GPS. Now I don't have to rely on it. I can be independent of it, and we got to foster that. They fail to involve their stakeholders. They say when you want the job done right, you got to do it yourself. That's the opposite of leadership. Leaders empower people to be successful, to function independently when you're not there. They treat people differently based on their position on the org chart. That drives me freaking nuts, right? They play the blame game. I'm not going to go through all these in the interest of time, but there's just a number of key behaviors that they engage in. Two things I want you to know, okay? Once again, if your leaders have this, are engaging in any of these behaviors, it's not them, it's their behavior, right? And their behavior falls under behavior principles as well. We need to know what their reinforcers are so you can engage in good behavioral questions. You can establish yourself as a positive reinforcer. You can use these questions to help them to become more self-aware, right? And leverage the use of positive reinforcement up. There's an old saying, like, the higher up the org chart you are, the more like your butt's exposed. A lot of the folks up the org chart higher are really not getting in touch with positive reinforcement, at least not socially mediated positive reinforcement for people. If your leader is doing something that you like, let them know, right? Because it's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to do it again. That's wonderful. And this way, if you have to go give them feedback that's corrective or ask them a question, or you're not happy about something, they're not going to see you as that person, right? The person that's always complaining about things. So leverage the power of positive reinforcement up, sideways, right? Reinforcement can be omnidirectional. It should not flow one direction. Use it everywhere. Establish yourself as a positive reinforcement reinforcer. If you saw any of those behaviors, that would be a sign that you've done that thing, engage in some sort of class ass clownery, which I have. We've all done this stuff. Remember, that's not you, it's your behavior. The first step is self-awareness, right? So you are already on the right path if you believe and you recognize that you've done some of this stuff and that you can make changes. So ask yourself some sort of behavioral questions, right? What am I doing? What's the impact of what am I doing? Is this aligned with my values? I like to use the ACT matrix to do this, or I used to use ACT matrix, but I have another approach for that I want to show you, right? But before I get to that, I want to give you this quote by Aubrey Daniels. I love this. Rest his soul, God rest his soul. He died this year. Aubrey Daniels is the father of organizational behavior management. He wrote the book Bringing Out the Best in People, which is what set me on the path. But what he said is, and I really believe this, that the intentional search for the impact of your actions sets you apart from those who try to replicate the actions of other leaders, right? So it's not about intent, it's about impact, and we have to measure our impact. But I will also say this, that's the start, self-awareness, right? About impact. But it's not just about that, it's also about adapting our behavior if we're not having the impact that we want. And so this is why I leaned into what I call adaptive intelligence. I want to explain what's different about this than the ACT matrix. Oh, you can't see what's down there. That's okay. I'll explain it. Now, we all have core values, right? We should have core values. We should know our core values. I have a core value of empowering people. I'll explain what's the difference between this and the ACT matrix. I now love to public speak because I want to disseminate, but I used to have a massive fear of public speaking, and I'd have private events that would show up inside of my head, and they would say, "You're going to embarrass yourself. You don't know this well enough. Somebody's going to challenge you, whatever." And so when somebody would ask me to public speak, and right here it says escape behaviors you can't see here, I would say when I was working for a school district, you know what? I don't want to do this. How about I create the PowerPoint? I set up all the chairs. I do the research, anything. I'll take out the garbage, anything but have to get up in front of people to public speak. And they would say, great, that sounds wonderful. And I would get such a sense of relief, right? That escape motivated behavior was allowing me to escape all of these feelings. Think about how good it feels to move away from anxiety. Doesn't it feel good? The problem is that we engage in behaviors that produce these immediately reinforcing outcomes for us, but those outcomes or those behaviors are not aligned with our values. For me, even though it felt good in the moment to escape the anxiety, I was also moving further and further away from my North Star, my values, right? I wanted to empower people through the science, but I was moving in the wrong direction. Even though I was getting a sense of satisfaction, not a sense of relief from the anxiety, I was engaging in value added behavior. So, what do I need to do? Well, I need to recognize that when I think and feel this way, I engage in this behavior. I need to realize that this behavior is not in alignment with my core values, right? And now I got to engage in a pinpoint replacement behavior, right? So I had to learn how to public speak. I had to watch videos on it. I had to practice it. I had to learn how to tell stories, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what the ACT people will tell you, and my stuff is just, so I initiate this behavior, right? So this is kind of like a self-functional behavior assessment, right? I know when I think and feel this way, I engage in this behavior, and I had to have a self-behavior intervention plan. If you see, I keep this and I need to initiate those behaviors. This is all in the realm of radical behaviorism. That's it. I don't need to step into any contextual behavior science. I have no problem with that. I just don't know enough about it. It's too sophisticated for me. It doesn't align with my value of keeping things simple. For you guys, it might be wonderful. If it works for you, keep doing it. But here's what the ACT people are missing, I believe. They talk about moving toward values, but they also make it very clear that values are not goals. So how do you move towards something that's not in place, right? So I believe that we need to establish value-driven goals and accomplishments, meaning we have to have something that we said, if public speaking is important to me, I have a goal that I'm going to speak 5 times this year, right? I have some accomplishments along the way where I want to know that I've engaged people, right? So I have a measure. I can see it, that they're smiling at me, that they're nodding, that they're leaning in, that they're asking me questions. They're coming back afterwards and saying, hey, I tried this stuff, right? So I have all these things, right? These data points that serve as reinforcers to let me know that I'm moving towards this goal of presenting, 5 times this year. Ultimately, with the ultimate goal, right? Value driven goal, that somebody comes back to me and says, you know what? Because this is the ultimate dissemination. I've used what you taught me, right? Which is this principle, and it's working for me. And now I use it every day. That's the ultimate dissemination. That's the function of dissemination, not just putting out in the world, getting people to adopt the basic principles of behavior, right? So that's all in my book. I call this the behavior alignment compass. You can see it's built off the ACT matrix, but I add in this part about having some sort of measure because I believe measurement, as we said earlier, it's fundamental to our field. We got to have some sort of data that lets us know that we're moving in the right direction because that's going to keep us on the path as we see ourselves moving. Does that make sense, everybody? So that's my behavior alignment compass. I believe that it's not just about being aware of our behavior, it's about adapting our behavior. And this is the adaptation here. Don't do this, do this instead, because doing this instead is going to move us towards our values. And I might feel when I was public speaking, I still felt uncomfortable. I still had all these private events that were coming up to me. But it doesn't matter in the end how I'm feeling. I need to engage in the right behavior, because as I engage in the right behavior, I started to produce these outcomes. People smiling at me, people thanking me, people saying this made so much sense. And that felt so amazing to me, because I really value empowering people. And as I started to get in touch more and more with those positive reinforcers, all these thoughts and feelings, they went away. And now just this past year, where I couldn't speak in front of 12 people before, I could fight in front of millions were on TV, right? And a live crowd of 12,000. I couldn't speak in front of 12. This past year, I spoke in front of 4,000 people live in a stadium. When they asked me, did I want to do it? I said, yes, I cannot wait. I'm going to get out there and crush it. But I had to go through the behavior to get there. And I let my values be the thing that pulled me towards it, right? And I had some sort of measurement. Very powerful. The power of positive reinforcement, truly powerful. All right. So final thing, if somebody's not performing to a standard, whether it's you or somebody else, performance diagnostics. Remember, I said at the beginning, it's either a can't do or don't do. Do yourself a favor. In all my books, I have the performance diagnostic checklist, but you don't have to get my book to do that. You can get a free one right here, right? This one has to do with behavior challenges. It actually has a cover page and a back page to it. But if you want a copy of that, there's like nothing. Just email this email right here, moreinfo@pcma.com, right? Because I work for professional crisis management. And one of my jobs, I'm also the do other stuff. I have my own consulting business, Heart and Science International, but PCMA is wonderful. If you just type into the heading of the email, say, send me a copy of the PDC, they will send you a free copy of it, right? The PDF, it's beautiful. If somebody's not performing to a standard when it comes to behavior interventions, you can just go down this checklist and figure it out. Okay, it's very practical. I love the PDC. I think through that lens, right? So moreinfo@pcma.com. And well, I thank you very much. I can't, let me see, that's not going to move. Let me move that up so you guys can connect with me. I'm just going to go out of this for a second and move that QR code up, so that way, there we go. Let me put the thing back on here. From current slide. There we go. If you guys want to connect with me, that has access to all my podcasts and to my LinkedIn, to my social media stuff, has access to books, to PCMA podcasts. And I think I already said that, and World Behavior Analysis Day podcast that Janet and I are on. Lots of cool stuff. And I thank you for having me out today. I'm sorry I went 3 minutes over, but I get passionate about this stuff.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you so, so much. Muchísimas gracias al doctor Polly por acompañarnos esta noche y a ustedes. La verdad que fue un honor tenerte con nosotros y aprender de tu experiencia, la energía que tiene y el compromiso que tiene la ciencia. También queremos agradecerles a todos ustedes, a nuestros miembros, ¿verdad? Que se conectaron esta noche. Valoramos profundamente que estén con nosotros, su presencia, su tiempo, ¿verdad? El compromiso con el crecimiento profesional y el fortalecimiento con la comunidad que tenemos. Y antes de despedirnos, les queremos también recordar que si ustedes están buscando los CEUs, ¿verdad? Creo que la doctora Varsovia también nos puso ese formulario también en el chat. Acuérdense que visiten el formulario y también también para recordarles con mucha emoción acerca de nuestro Congreso Internacional, ¿verdad? Que se llevará a cabo en Oaxaca este agosto. Será un espacio increíble. Gracias también a todos ustedes por acompañarnos esta noche. Si tiene algunas preguntas, no sé si tenga tiempo, Dr. Polly, if there's any questions. I'm not sure if you have maybe a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. If I
there's
got
anything.
questions, shoot them. Yeah. And if somebody doesn't feel comfortable asking them here, they can always just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm very, I'm very open to, I respond a lot. My job is on social media. So
Wonderful.
it's all about leadership and systems, in my opinion. Imagine if all leaders understood the principles of behavior and they had the values, right? The right values. They valued people. They understood how to get, if you're going to get results, you need behavior, and it's people who behave. So we get the best behavior out of people when we use positive reinforcement. If they understood this, oh my gosh, the world will be a better place, and we hold the key to this.
Thank you so much for reminding us that, Polly, because I think when I first read about OBM, maybe a decade ago or a little bit more, it was like very separate, different topic from ABA. Like only if you are in charge of a big organization or things like that. And right now, like everything you said, it's just very relevant reminders to all of us practitioners who belong to an organization, who run an organization. I mean, we're surrounded by organizations and behaviors. So it's so, I think it's an amazing reminder for all of us. And I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely. Get this information into the hands of the leaders. This one slide, I have a couple questions up here. I love these questions. I'm going to answer them really quick. This slide here might be the most important slide that somebody can see. We could just replace this stuff, right? Leaders need to understand performance engineering. If the chain is broken anywhere, we're not going to get the results that we want, right? And they need to understand that each person here is responsible for the behavior of these folks. And so we need each person to engage in leadership. In fact, we need to learn to engage in self-leadership as well. That's why leadership is so important. They need to understand how to design their environment. So I had a couple questions here. Let me see. What does assessment look like? Here's what I do with assessment. I literally take this, what I'm showing you, and I say, okay, and I sit down with the stakeholders and I say, what should your system look like? What outcome in regards to some sort of outcome they're trying to produce, right? What should it look like? What are people, in other words, we want, just to give you the example that we're working on, and this could be anything, it could be employee retention, it could be, the number of consumers that are meeting goals, but I'm just going to stay with what we were working on earlier and say it was suspensions, right? So we said, this is what's going to happen. What ideally is what we talked about. We said, well, we need learners to follow expectations. We need classroom leaders to teach it. We need school leaders to do A, B, and C, right? And we design it so we know what people would need to do in order to produce this outcome. Then we come back and we do it again. And then we say, what does it currently look like? What are the learners doing? Why are they doing that? What are the classroom leaders? Why are they doing that? What's the school leader doing? Why are they doing that? And so the difference between the desired state and the current state, right? That gap, that is where you determine your intervention. Maybe the why here was that classroom leaders hadn't been trained in classroom management, right? Well, why hadn't they been trained? Well, school leaders didn't know, right? And or maybe they were trained, but the school leaders hadn't gone out and coached because they didn't know that you can't train without follow-up coaching if you want to stick. So you use this to determine where the performance is. And I also always look for quick wins. What's that thing that we can do? It's another book that I wrote, but I'll tell you what it is right now. The thing that we can do that produces, that's easy to do, low response effort, and produces a visible and valued outcome for the people. In the school that I turned around, I didn't try to fix the whole school. I tried to fix one hallway. And when we fixed that hallway, it gave people belief in themselves, self-efficacy. I know I can do this. I know if I can do this, response efficacy, it's going to produce this outcome, right? They believe that they can change behavior, and they believed in me, and they believed in the science of human behavior. But if you make everything important, nothing's important. You got to help them behave well enough and long enough that they produce a valued outcome. If it's a classroom, change just one small transition. If it's in the home, change just one activity or a part of the activity. Help people to see that they can produce these outcomes, right? That's going to, and it's also going to help you believe in yourself. You're like, oh, this stuff really works. All right. Now, I have the question about, and by the way, that's my simple application of behavior systems analysis. I'd want to get out there and see things myself. I'd want to interview some different people. I'm not going to just take it leadership word for it, but I'm going to have them tell me to begin with. And then I want to go out and see everything for myself, right? Direct observation. How would I, let me see, intervention. Oh, do you think you can use the compass with migrant students? Yes, please. I believe all students, everybody needs to learn how to use the behavior alignment compass. There needs to be an activity where they learn about their values. What are our values? What's important to you, right? And, this is where ACT comes in. They do have lots of different things to help them unpack that, but they need to learn about adapting their own behavior. They need to learn that it's all about your behavior. You want different results, you need to engage in different behaviors, and you need to understand your values. You need to understand your private event. What is showing up for you? And when you feel that way, what are you doing? Is that thing aligned with what your ultimate outcomes that you want to produce, your values, right? Okay, if it's not, what can you do instead that's going to help you move in that direction despite how you're feeling? So absolutely, and it can be made fun for the kids, in my book Quick Responses, that's the latest, my second edition, we have the ACT matrix for teachers where they do it with their classroom, right? With the building the classroom management plan, or with the school leaders to work with the teachers. And what I did with that, I did infuse having data in there, right? Identifying goals and accomplishments so you're moving towards their values. Because again, the ACT folks don't talk about that. But so it could be, you could just use the ACT matrix and had goals and accomplishments, or I just like the idea of the behavior alignment compass. The compass suggests your North Star, your values, and I think it's a nice way for people to think, hey, check your compass, right? Are you engaging in behaviors that are aligned with your North Star? It's a nice way to think about it. How would you recommend to navigate if you notice systems are in place and leadership does not initiate creating systems that are needed? I think you mean our systems are not in place. So this is really important question here. I engage in motivational interviewing. It's a skill. We got to find out what's important to people. So there was research done on 35,000 sales calls by this guy named Neil Rackham. And he wrote a book called Spin Selling. Now, the word spin and selling to me sound manipulative, but it wasn't. What it was, I'm going to keep it very behavioral, very simple. Salespeople will ask people, what are the reinforcers, right? Then they're going to ask what's blocking their access to the reinforcers. Then they're going to ask a couple more questions and uncover, all right, what are the implications of those things? Like, it's not just about this. If it's that school leader and they're like, well, this kid's acting out. Well, hey, like, why is he acting out? Well, the teacher's not doing good classroom management. Well, were they trained in classroom management? Well, no, they weren't. Well, have any of your teachers been trained in classroom management? Well, no, they haven't. Are you getting behavior from other parts of the school? Yes, I have. Well, how does that impact you as a school leader? Is it messing with you? Are you having to deal with parents? Are you having to deal with suspensions? Or is it hurting your school grades? Like, yes, all those things. So it's helping to connect those outcomes, right? So those are the implications. And the final thing we say is, hey, what if I were able to help you to remove the blockade to your reinforcers, good school grades, being able to sleep at night on the weekends, your teachers performing well? Would you be willing to engage in some sort of behavior change? So when we ask those questions and we get them to reflect on their current behavior and the outcomes it's producing versus what they might do in the outcomes producing, this is how we engage people. And that's putting on the leading hat. And so motivational interviewing, there's a lot of good research behind it. It's a very it's a very structured process with having open-ended questions, affirmations, they call those ors, reflective questions, and summarizing things. And what we do is we look for change talk with the individual, right? People going from resistant talk or ambivalence talk to saying, well, maybe I could do this, or I suppose that could happen. And that change talk serves as data points for us to know that maybe it's time to go ahead and move towards some sort of planning. But we don't want to plan if we haven't put that leading hat on, if we haven't created the one, if people don't see what's in it for them. So I would highly recommend that. They have a bunch of books out on it. I have a course on it called Motivational Interviewing with the Behavioral Toolbox. The link is in my link that I put there, but it's the behavioraltoolbox.com if you want to check that out. These are great questions. I love these. Thank you, guys. Anybody got any other questions?
That was wonderful, Polly. Y gracias por las preguntas, estaban perfectas, la verdad. Es un tema bastante interesante. So this is a very interesting topic and conversation, and we look forward to continuing this.
Awesome. Maybe next year I'll be out to the conference, the OMPAC conference, right? And I did send out 5 books, so they're going to be giving away some free books to the folks that go to that. I hope that you guys,
Thank
show up to the
you.
conference.
Yes, we're excited. Yes, absolutely. We will definitely need you to be one of our invited presenters for our next international conference.
That'd be fun, man. It would be an honor, and it was an honor to be out here. Did we have some people show up on the YouTube channel?
We did. Yes, we did. We had maybe about a little bit over 30 in total. I believe that's what I was counting last.
All right, very cool.
So,
Awesome.
thank you again, Dr. Polly, and thank you everyone for attending. Muchísimas gracias a todos por acompañarnos esta noche. No sé si la doctora Varsovia tendrá algunas palabras, algún recordatorio.
No,
Muchas gracias.
thank you, Polly, because it was really, really interesting. And I think that we all learned a lot from you. And well, just like a final words, as you know, we have the conference in August, so everyone is invited to join us. We will have a great time, a lot of invited speakers that are really good. Hopefully, Polly, in the next conference, you will be there.
I'm going to come. Yep, absolutely.
Great.
Count
So,
me in.
yes. So, todos están muy invitados y gracias por asistir el día de hoy y acompañarnos con este webinar.
Bye, guys. Good
Gracias a
night.
todos. Thank you so much.
Gracias, bonita
Adiós.
noche.
Have a
Bye.
great evening. Bye bye.